Hi everyone, I want to share some more thoughts on what we need to do and not to do, or indeed to stop doing, if we're going to undo the mess that we've made of our political culture here in the United States. You know, when Mitch McConnell gave that speech recently on why he would certify the Electoral College votes to make Biden president, he rightly and importantly pointed out the huge damage it would do to vote to undermine a process, a constitutional election of our president, given the absence of evidence, according to our courts, that there would be a reason not to certify, right? There was no evidence, according to our institutions, on which we should refrain from certifying. So said Mitch McConnell, he's going to go ahead and fulfill his duty. He was right to point out that if at some point in a nation's history you defy that duty, then you let the genie out of the bottle, right? This is part of the genius, actually, of the British Constitution, which is unwritten. It recognizes that words themselves, that the writing of a constitution cannot make a constitution, because at the end of the day, it's all about the willingness of the leaders and the people to, as it were, enforce, to stand by, to manifest, to act on that constitution. In other words, it all comes down to the people. Now, interestingly, the founders in the Declaration of Independence said as much, even about their country for which they wrote a constitution, right? They talked about how it's up to the people to overthrow a government when the government becomes at odds with its duties to protect the rights of its citizens, and so on and so forth. It rests with the people, and the people in the broadest sense, including the people in power, whose job it is to represent us and to carry out the Constitution. Okay, so with all of that said, McConnell made a good speech up until the point when he couldn't resist taking a stab at the Democrats for trying to steal elections themselves in previous years. So basically his speech was, it would be awful to support these claims of stealing an election, but by the way, that's what the Democrats always do. He turned an opportunity to raise the sights of this nation, and certainly of people who associate with his party, to a bigger vision of America, to the bigger purpose of America, to the bigger values, fundamental values of America. He didn't just do that. He also took the partisan dig. Now, he might have been right. He might be right on the facts. He might be wrong. I don't know. I don't have any skin in that game. I am neither a Republican nor a Democrat. No love lost here. But what he did in making that choice was to again choose partisanship, to again choose tribalism. There were a million things that are right and wrong about the Democrats and the Republicans. So the idea so the defense that, but it's true, if you happen to agree with him, isn't really a defense. The impact you have politically, as a person, but especially as a politician, it's less the impact of what you believe or even what you say about an issue. It's more the impact of what you choose to say, what you choose to talk about at all, and when you choose to raise it. That's really what determines how political debate and discourse and norms develop. Pence drew a line, broadly speaking, against Trump. McConnell did in that speech, notwithstanding what I just said. Lindsey Graham, a supporter of Trump's, also said, no, this cannot stand. this behavior of Trump that fed in, according to most people, to the behaviors that we witnessed, the criminal behaviors that we witnessed in the Capitol. Well, it's good that these people found their limit. Many reasonable people who are not supporters of Trump or Graham or Pence, etc., might say, well, it took you a while. How come you've been quiet all this time, allowing this thing to grow and get worse? And now all of a sudden, you've found your limit. Well, I kind of discussed that a little bit in my earlier video. But here's what I want to say now about that. You would be entitled to that skepticism. And indeed, to my friends who identify on the right and might be more concerned with, let's say, riots under the auspices of Antifa or Black Lives Matter, you are entitled to your skepticism. But in every case, in working out how we improve this country, we get out of this mess. In other words, in solving the problem, we've got a choice to make. And that choice needs to be based on this simple truism, that what we focus on, what we give energy to, we make bigger. So when we see these horrific behaviors that we've seen, criminal behaviors in DC, we can say, look, that's really bad. Look at all these bad people. It's so typical of that group of people, blah, 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 blah. Or we can say, yep, we don't support that. Now, what do we get on and do instead? Who else is out there who wants to do this differently? In particular, who else is out there that I don't agree with politically, but that who I can build trust with, so that although we disagree, maybe on some quite important political issues, we can work together within the parameters of decency, civility, and our democratic institutions. Find those people. Be that. There's an old phrase, right, which is attributed to Gandhi, I think wrongly. Be the change that you want to see in the world. That is what we're called to do now. Because we could be quite right in calling the blame. And maybe, do it once or twice as appropriate in a context when it's going to do some good. But otherwise, be the solution. Be the solution. Now, I suggest going to humilitarian.us to find out what that solution looks like. But more importantly, realize that what you talk about next, what you give energy to, do you give energy to being appalled repeatedly? Or do you spend that time and those words instead to do politics differently, to actually speak kindly about political opponents, to actually, instead of blaming those who do wrong, to point out those maybe on the other side who you need to build a bridge with, who do right? What you focus on, you make bigger. It was a colonel in the Revolutionary War on the American side, on the Patriot side. Is it Preston? W.B. Prescott, who said, in any contest between patience and power, bet on patience. He was right. That's deep wisdom. We've seen it in wars, internal and external. As I say, he was a colonel. He fought a war. The Americans, the Patriots, had patience against the British, who, at least at the beginning, had the power. Patience triumphed over power. Patience in Vietnam triumphed over power too. And so it goes. If we do what I'm suggesting here, we have cause for optimism. Things look pretty dire right now. But for a moment, there were certain people who had power in DC that they exercised destructively. And I will completely admit, let's be clear, that people have abused power and used power, whether riotous mobs or actually, elected representatives, have used power without integrity, without justice, without consistency, in a tribal way, increasingly for years. Okay, they have that power and they abuse it, and we don't. But if we choose to be the solution and we're willing to be patient, And we're willing to do what I'm suggesting here for as long as it takes. To find people with whom we disagree with and to treat them well. To talk to them with decency. To target, to make our goal the building of trust until such time that there's enough trust that we can conduct politics in the opposite way from what we saw on January the 6th and from what we've seen in other places in the United States over the last few years. If we give it that long and we stay true, there is hope. Not only is there hope, we're almost guaranteed to succeed. Patience will win over power. Remember too, that power, politics itself, can only do what we, the culture, the people, allow it to do. It's this idea of the Overton window, right? But the Overton window is an idea that really is used about kind of, policy usually. But it's also true in terms of how we do politics. What kind of discourse is acceptable? What way of treating each other is acceptable? If we don't support politicians who condescend, who divide, even with our silence, just because we think those guys, maybe for a Republican, the Republicans aren't as bad as the Democrats, or the Democrats, if we're a Democrat, aren't as bad as the Republicans. So we stay silent when we hear them putting people down, being nasty, choosing to interpret the opponent in the worst possible way, refusing to give the benefit of the doubt of the opponent, refusing to actually try and work out what it must feel like to be one of the opponents and represent his or her views in a way that they would find fair, right? If we stand by as we watch all of that bad behavior, well, then we're part of the problem. We're contributing to it. We're saying, yeah, you just keep doing that. We're not going to stop it. I'm calling really for integrity. This goes back to the earlier video I made where I said that integrity requires us to judge behaviors consistently regardless of who exhibits them. When you say it, it's obvious. It's kind of morally banal. And yet, most of our politics, this mess, has been about the fact that most of us don't do that. Certainly not when it comes to political argument. We can change that. Every one of us can change that tomorrow. Every one of us can say, you know what? I'm a Republican. I'm not, but let's say I'm a Republican, but you, my Republican senator or representative, have behaved unacceptably. And I want you to know. And the next time, I won't be voting for you. We have to punish bad behavior wherever it comes from. And I don't just mean put down the person who exhibits it and make ourselves feel better and righteous and then do nothing. I mean, we have to change our behaviors accordingly. We have to not contribute. That'll do for now. Thanks for your time.